Sample A. Both texts, Yevgeny Zamyatin's We and Naguib Mahfouz's Miramar, use a conflicting atmosphere where the volatility of characters presents with turbulence that aids both authors in depicting external and internal conflicts in their novels. Authors use a variety of techniques, including pathetic fallacies, metaphors, and narrative tones, along the utilization of some characters as a medium of conflict. Zamyatin's novel, published in 1921, depicts an atmosphere of conflict, reflective of the author's context during the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia and during Lenin's reign. Similarly, Mahfouz's novel, published after the 1952 revolution, depicts the social and political conflicts in Egypt at the time of the Triple Aggression. Both contexts give rise to turbulent atmospheres in which conflict is not merely a theme, but a setting and a medium that exemplifies internal and external conflicts of characters. The utilization of the actual atmosphere and weather elements is significantly emphasized in both We and Miramar. Zamyatin uses pathetic fallacies in which the weather reflects D503's emotions and state of mind. Parallel to the development of rebellious tendencies, the weather changes from the sterile and immaculate sky of one state to a milky solution where the fog dissolves the glass, turning everything opaque. In one state, where everything from houses to mines are transparent, the accumulation of fog, making the air opaque, portrays the conflict or deterioration of one state. The opaque nature of the ancient house is likened in a simile to the human body, to which the windows are compared to eyes. The contrast between opaque and transparent is mirrored not only in the past's contrast with the present, but also the contrast of the natural human body and the manufactured eternal glass. The use of the weather is meant to portray the external conflict of different ideas as well as D53's internal conflict. The falling barometer signifies the fall not of one state which prevails eventually, but of D503. The use of diction, including his self-depiction of his state of mind as clouded, further reflects the use of the literal atmosphere to portray internal conflicts. Contrasting with being freshly distilled, the contrast between the clear sky representing transparency and the occurrence of clouds representing impurities that contribute to the opaque characteristic is a reflection of the volatile weather changes that is ironic as the novel begins during the spring. The similar use of pathetic fallacies is evident in Mahfouz's Miramar, whereby the elements of nature as personified and are consistently in a storm state, presenting an ongoing conflicting atmosphere. Parallelism used in the personified description of weather elements, including how the rain rattled the windows, thunder shook the walls, exemplifies the stormy weather in which conflict is depicted to portray the continuous internal conflicts of all characters. Similarly, simile is used to refer to how the wind howled like a, genie, which further emphasizes the exaggerated extent of the strength of the storm in Alexandria. Characters even use apostrophes referring to the absence of the wild tempest, as they hope for torrents to purge and cleanse themselves, as well as rid themselves of their own internal conflicts, as presented in Cosmic Rage. The conflicting atmosphere reflects the external conflict of characters. Once Sora, which is a symbol of Egypt, and therefore stems from the ongoing political conflict between Abdel Nasser followers and opposition during 1967 after land reforms, and the confiscation and nationalization or rationalization of private property stirred rage in the upper classes, while instigating praise and satisfaction of the lower social classes. Therefore, the utilization of turbulent weather conditions through the use of pathetic fallacies, metaphors, similes, personification, and apostrophes is portrayed in both texts for the purpose of reflecting similar mediums of conflict within and between the different characters. Zamyatin uses the protagonist, D503, as a medium of conflict, as a portrayal of the conflicting atmosphere. D503's records, which are narrated in first person, provide insight into his thoughts, as the records act as a seismograph, as metaphorically compared by himself. The self-depiction of his transformation is due to the illustration of a conflicting atmosphere that is demonstrated through him. The creation of his other self emphasizes the existence of a chasm in his personality as he becomes two distinct personas due to T330's influential presence that both inspires and irritates him. The development of a soul, which is compared to cholera, and his self-depiction is an extended metaphor as a microbe that only pretends to be a phagocyte. Further portrays his rebellious and sick self. The use of such symbols as dreams further elaborate on his gradual transformation, as it is all perceived as sickness, with attacks of inspiration of the ancients compared to epilepsy. The creation of two different selves within him is reflected in the use of ellipses due to interrupted and unsaid thoughts, and the radical shifts in perspective with repeated usage of his stream of consciousness, which presents with several fragments and gaps in thought. Therefore, this leads to the dual depiction of all elements and characters, including I-330, which is alluded to so as to represent either Christ or Antichrist, depending on the shift in perspective between the appreciation of her revolutionary and I'm not sure what it says, and self-sacrificing crucifixion in being executed, and a negative perspective depicting him as the radical that instigates rebellion, like the Antichrist against one state. This is directly linked to Zamyatin, as he was originally a Bolshevik who was arrested and exiled repeatedly, with his book being banned by the censorship in Russia until 1968. However, ended up shifting by leaving for the Left Socialist Party after the rise of Lenin. Lenin himself is therefore depicted as a revolutionary, but alternatively an oppressor who led to the execution of thousands during the Red Terror. Differently, Mahfouz relies heavily on narrative techniques, as Miramar is a novel told by 4 different male characters, and therefore the atmosphere of conflict is primarily portrayed by Mahfouz's unpreceded use of radical shifts in perspective. He also uses interior monologues that depict the contrast between the characters' external and internal voices, as well as italicized excerpts from their past as flashbacks represent the natural conflict with their pasts. Hosni Alam's repeated hazardous 100 fedans presents is unresolved internal conflict due to his refusal, due to his lack of education. Hosni similarly presents with contrast between his internal perspective, including misogynistic and classist remarks, including the objectification of women as elements to enhance interior decoration or public vehicles, and his external unsaid thoughts regarding Zohra. Such perspectives clearly contrast with other characters in which Hosni Alam and Mansour Bahi can act as foils due to one's complete disregard for etiquette and education, while Mansour thinks of bookcases and how Zohra should be in school. The change in perspective is primarily symbolic, as the characters are archetypes and representative of the different political and social characters. Mahfouz's return after 6 years of hiatus is depicted in his involvement of the different types of characters while consistently demonstrating a criticism of narcissism and the moral failure of the revolution. Hence, the conflicting and volatile atmosphere is conveyed through the use of characters in both novels, as Zamyatin uses D503 and his internal schism, while Mahfouz uses the variety of character perspectives and their conflicting thoughts, characteristics, and actions. Religious allusions are used in both texts, however, differently to further portray conflict. In We, the external struggle between D503 and the benefactor is a biblical allusion to Adam and Eve in paradise. One state is paradise due to its comparison to a perfectly straight line that offers the mathematically infallible happiness. D503 is Adam and I330 is Eve, as she lures him to eat from the forbidden apple, literally in his consumption of nicotine and alcohol, which are not allowed in one state, or metaphorically in his rebellious acts, including his sexual relationship with I330, passing over the Gren wall and not conforming to the table of hours. The struggle between the ideas of I330 and the benefactor are represented as the struggle that D503 refers to the ancients who have idiotically chosen freedom over happiness. The dialogue between D503 and the benefactor presents with a hyperphora in which the benefactor asserts that the one thing everyone craves is happiness. The irony of his explanation that people should be binded to it by a chain elucidates the trade-off between happiness and freedom. the ideological conflict represented through dialogue, references, and the description of the beauty of the demise, I'm not sure, that lies in its aesthetic subjection to non-freedom highlights the external and primary conflict of ideas in we, which is conveyed and aided by the atmosphere of conflict. This directly relates to the struggle between anarchy, referred to in the novel as Methe, a reference to Faust's devil, Mephistopheles, and the happiness and security provided by Lenina. Zamyatin's disapproval of the totalitarian regime exemplifies his personal choice of freedom, as he wrote a letter to Stalin, ironically referring to him as the devil and asking for permission to emigrate due to lack of basic freedoms. However, contrasts with the majority's choice of happiness, as they remained enslaved to totalitarian regimes from Lenin to Stalin until the arrival of Gorbachev's presidential regime. Differently, the ironic placement of Quran verses in Miramar has the same effect of representing the most important of conflicts. The atmosphere is conveyed by the repetitive occurrence of the verses used by Amar Wagdi in both the beginning and the end. The verses directly refer to an alternative conflict of Pharaoh and Moses, which is a symbolic representation of Abdel Nasser as the oppressing Pharaoh, which was a common epithet used by the Muslim Brotherhood at the time in reference to Abdel Nasser. Hence, the conflict is used to depict and exaggerate the extent to Abdel Nasser's failure and reign of oppression. The use of the excerpts from the Quran, including some from the Beneficent, are usually present after a significant drawback or fall of one of the characters. The use of the verses acts as a consolation, however. Due to their repeated integration, it is clear that Miramar is only a depiction of defeats and further setbacks, with the only constant variable being conflict. Mahfouz's previously referenced hiatus and withdrawal from novel writing after the 1952 revolution was due to his belief that Egypt has been freed and there is no longer any conflict to write about. His return with Miramar thus highlights the recurrence of losses and failures presented with constantly referenced excerpts urging patience, while consolating seems aimless as it continues occurring after Shanu's death and is the ending of the novel. Hence, the conveyed atmosphere of conflict is depicted through the biblical illusion of paradise in we and the structure and usage of the Quran verses in Miramar to portray the eternal struggle of freedom and happiness in one state and in nations under totalitarian regimes by Zamyatin, and the failure and loss of hope in and in Egypt entirely by Mahfouz. Therefore, both novels, We by Yevgeny Zamyatin and Miramar by Naguib Mahfouz, use conflicting atmospheres that present with turbulence and volatility to convey internal and external conflicts of characters. While both utilize weather through the use of pathetic fallacies, we discusses the direct implication of weather changes with reliance on recurrent diction and mathematical and logical language. While Miramar personifies the elements and illustrates vividly the current storm, Zamyatin and Mahfouz use characters to present and re-emphasize the atmosphere of conflict, as Zamyatin uses D803 as a medium of conflict, while Mahfouz uses shifting perspectives to portray external conflict of characters. Religious allusions in both texts, the biblical allusion in the dystopian Russian novel and the Quran verses in the character-based Egyptian novel are used to represent ideological conflict in we and to arrive at eventual point of failure in Miramar. Hence, both texts integrate conflicting atmospheres in varied ways with the aid of literary technique to exemplify internal and external conflicts of characters, thoughts, and ideas, so as to stimulate the stage of almost transformation of characters and ideas, only to fall before the complete metamorphosis of Mephi in we and the complete development of Zohra in Miramar. Their realistic approach and eventual conclusion is thus arrived at through the use of turbulent and volatile atmospheres of conflicting ideas in which rising at once recalls weakness, strength recalls weakness, loss recalls depravity, and most importantly, hope recalls despair.